The gate camera showed her leaving at midnight again. Damian Cole stood in the dark study of his mansion, watching the small screen with narrowed eyes. Elena Whitfield, his maid of 2 years, moved quickly across the courtyard, a scarf wrapped around her head, a bag clutched to her chest, like it held something precious. This was the 4th night in a row. Every time, she returned before dawn, her eyes red, her hands shaking as she poured his morning coffee. Damian did not tolerate secrets in his house. He had built an empire on knowing everything before anyone else did, on catching betrayal before it caught him. A maid who slipped away at midnight and returned hollow-eyed was either stealing from him, meeting someone dangerous, or worse, passing information to people who wanted him dead. He grabbed his coat. Outside, the night air was sharp and cold. His driver, Nathaniel, waited by the car, but Damian waved him off. Tonight, he would follow her alone. No noise, no attention, just the truth. Elena walked fast, her breath fogging in front of her face, cutting through side streets instead of the main road. She was trying not to be seen. That only made Damian more certain something was wrong. He kept his distance, staying in the shadows of shuttered shops, his hand resting inside his coat where a weapon usually sat, though tonight he had left it behind, not wanting to be tempted into rash decisions before he understood what he was dealing with. She crossed under a bridge, past a closed market, until the tall shape of St. Agnes Hospital rose ahead of her, its windows glowing pale yellow against the black sky. Damian stopped at the corner, watching her walk through the sliding doors like she had done it 100 times before. His jaw tightened. A hospital. Not a rival family's warehouse. Not a rendezvous with an enemy. A hospital. He waited 3 minutes before following her inside, keeping his collar up and his head low. The lobby was quiet, the fluorescent lights humming, a night nurse dozing behind the front desk. Elena did not stop there. She walked straight past the desk like she belonged, like the staff already knew her, and disappeared down a corridor marked with a sign that made Damian's chest tighten. Pediatric Care Unit. He followed at a distance, staying near the wall, watching her stop outside a door near the end of the hall. Through the narrow window in the door, he saw a small boy lying in a hospital bed, tubes running from his thin arm, a monitor beeping steadily beside him. The boy could not have been older than 7. Elena pressed her hand against the glass first, like she needed a second to compose herself, and then opened the door and stepped inside. Damian stayed outside, hidden by the shadow of a supply cart, and watched through the window. Elena sat on the edge of the bed and gently touched the boy's hair. The boy stirred, opened his eyes, and gave her a weak smile. She smiled back, though Damian could see how forced it was, how much effort it took her to keep her voice steady as she spoke to him. She pulled a small book from her bag and began to read aloud, her voice barely reaching Damian through the door, but the tenderness in it was unmistakable. He had never seen this woman look this way. In his house, Elena was quiet, efficient, careful never to draw attention to herself. She cleaned his rooms, prepared his meals, kept her eyes down when he passed her in the hallway. He had never once wondered what her life looked like outside his walls. Now, watching her sit beside a sick child in the middle of the night, exhaustion carved into every line of her face, he felt something shift inside him that he did not have a name for. A nurse walked by and gave him a curious look. Damian straightened, forcing his expression into something neutral, and stepped further down the hall, pretending to check his phone. When he glanced back, the nurse had stopped near Elena's door, speaking with her in a low voice. He could not hear the words, but he could read the shape of them on Elena's face. Her shoulders sank. Her hand went to her mouth. Bad news. Damian's fists clenched at his sides. He did not know this child. He did not know why the sight of Elena's grief struck something raw in him, something he had buried a long time ago, back when he was young and powerless and watching someone he loved fade in a hospital bed just like this one, unable to do anything to stop it. He left before she could see him, walking fast back through the corridor, out into the cold night air, his mind racing. He got into his car and sat there for a long moment, staring at the hospital entrance, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He told himself it was not his problem. He told himself that whatever burden Elena carried outside his walls was hers alone to bear, that a man in his position could not afford distractions, could not afford to let sentiment cloud the careful control he kept over every part of his life. But when he closed his eyes, all he could see was the boy's thin arm, the tubes, the fear on Elena's face when the nurse delivered whatever news had broken her composure. He drove home in silence. When he reached the mansion, he did not go to bed. Instead, he sat at his desk and opened his laptop, searching hospital records he had no legal right to access, using contacts he usually reserved for tracking enemies. Within an hour, he had the boy's name: Caleb Whitfield, Elena's younger brother, 6 years old. A rare blood condition that required a treatment the family could not afford, a treatment that the public hospital could offer only in limited doses, with a long waiting list that Caleb might not survive. Damien sat back in his chair, the glow of the screen lighting his face. For 2 years, Elena Whitfield had walked through his house in silence, carrying this weight completely alone, never once asking him for help, never once letting her employer see the fear behind her eyes. She had saved every spare coin, worked every extra shift he offered without complaint, and disappeared into the night to sit beside her dying brother while the rest of the world slept. He thought of his own resources, the money that meant nothing to him, sitting untouched in accounts he barely checked. He thought of the doctors who owed him favors, the private clinics that would move a patient to the front of any list if he made a single phone call. He also thought of his enemies, the rival families circling his territory, waiting for any sign of weakness, any crack in his armor they could exploit. A man like him could not be seen showing mercy. Mercy was a door, and doors could be used against him. Still, he picked up his phone. He did not call to reveal himself. He called a doctor he had helped years ago, a man who now ran one of the finest private clinics in the city, and he asked a single question in a voice that left no room for refusal. "Can you take a patient tomorrow, no questions asked, and make sure the family never learns where the arrangement came from?" The doctor did not hesitate. He never did, not with Damien Cole. Damien ended the call and sat in the dark, the first hint of dawn beginning to creep through the curtains. Tomorrow, Elena would receive a call telling her that her brother had been accepted into a private program, fully funded, no explanation given. She would be confused. She might even be suspicious, but she would not know it came from him. He told himself this was simply the right thing to do, nothing more. A debt he owed to the version of himself who once sat helpless beside a hospital bed with no power to change anything. He told himself it had nothing to do with the way her voice had softened when she spoke to her brother, or the quiet strength in her hands as she held the small book steady despite her exhaustion. But as the sun rose over the city, and the sound of Elena's footsteps echoed faintly down the hallway as she began her morning duties, Damien Cole realized that something in his carefully controlled world had already changed, and there was no undoing it now. He heard her pause outside his study door, the way she always did before knocking. He straightened his shoulders and called for her to enter, his face arranged into its usual mask of cold indifference. She stepped inside, tray in hand, dark circles under her eyes that she had tried and failed to hide with a little powder. She set his coffee down without meeting his gaze, the same way she did every morning. Damien watched her hands. They were steady now, though he had seen them shake with fear only hours before. He wondered how many mornings she had walked into this room carrying secrets like this, smiling politely, pretending everything was fine, while somewhere across the city, a small boy fought for his life. He wanted to ask her. He wanted to tell her what he had seen, what he had done. But the words caught in his throat, buried beneath years of instinct that told him never to reveal his hand, never to let anyone see a weakness they could use against him. Instead, he simply said, "Thank you, Elena," in a voice quieter than he intended. She looked up at him then, startled, as if she had never heard him say her name with anything close to warmth before. For a moment, their eyes met, and something passed between them that neither of them could explain. Then she nodded, murmured a quiet reply, and left the room. Damien sat alone with his coffee growing cold in front of him, staring at the door long after she had gone, already knowing that tonight, when she slipped out again to visit her brother, he would follow her once more. Only this time, he would not be watching a stranger. He would be watching someone whose pain had somehow become his own. Throughout the day, Damien found it difficult to focus on the usual demands of his empire. Reports arrived from his territory managers, updates on shipments along the eastern docks, warnings about a rival family testing the edges of his influence, and yet none of it held his attention the way it normally did. His mind kept drifting back to the hospital corridor, to the sight of Elena's trembling hands, to the small boy whose thin frame had reminded him so sharply of a version of himself he had spent years trying to forget. By late afternoon, Gideon Marsh arrived at the study with the day's briefing, only to find his employer staring out the window instead of reviewing the documents laid out before him. "Is something troubling you, sir?" Gideon asked carefully. He had served Damien long enough to recognize the rare moments when something managed to break through his employer's iron composure. Damien did not answer immediately. Instead, he asked a question of his own. "What do you know about the maid, Elena Whitfield?" Gideon raised an eyebrow, surprised by the sudden interest. "Only what the household staff reports, sir. Reliable, quiet, keeps to herself. Why do you ask?" "No reason," Damien said, turning back toward his desk, his tone closing the subject as firmly as a door. "Just curious." Gideon said nothing further, though his expression suggested he did not fully believe the dismissal. He left the study a short while later, leaving Damien alone once more with his thoughts, and with the growing certainty that whatever he had witnessed at the hospital the night before was only the beginning of something he could not yet fully understand. That evening, as the household settled into its usual rhythm, Damien found himself watching Elena more closely than he ever had before. He noticed the careful way she avoided drawing attention to herself, the practiced calm in her voice whenever she addressed him, the exhaustion she hid so well behind polite efficiency. He wondered how many other details about her life he had simply never bothered to notice, too consumed by his own concerns to see the person moving quietly through his household every single day. When she brought his evening tea, he studied her hands as she set the tray down, the same hands he had watched hold a small boy's fingers just hours before, and something tightened in his chest that he refused to name. "Will there be anything else, sir?" she asked, her eyes lowered respectfully. "No," he said, his voice quieter than he intended. "That will be all." She left the room without another word, and Damien sat alone in the growing darkness, already certain that tonight, once the house fell silent and she slipped out again into the cold, he would be waiting. Elena Whitfield stared at her phone screen, reading the message 3 times before she believed it. "Your brother has been accepted into the Ashford Private Care Program. All costs covered. Treatment begins tomorrow morning." She sat on the edge of her narrow bed in the small room above a bakery that she rented with what little money she had left after sending most of her wages to the hospital. Her hands trembled as she read the message a 4th time, searching for some hidden catch, some fee she had missed, some mistake that would be corrected the moment she called to confirm. But when she called the number listed, a calm voice on the other end confirmed everything. Caleb Whitfield had been approved for immediate transfer to Ashford Clinic, one of the most respected private hospitals in the city, a place Elena had once looked up online and closed the browser tab within seconds, knowing there was no way she could ever afford even a single night there, let alone the extended treatment her brother needed. She asked who had arranged it. The voice on the phone said only that the details were confidential, that an anonymous donor had covered the full cost, and that a car would arrive at 7 in the morning to transport Caleb safely. Elena sat in stunned silence long after the call ended, her mind spinning through every possibility. She had no family with that kind of money. She had no friends who could arrange something like this. The only person in her life who came close to that level of wealth and power was the man she worked for, a man who barely spoke to her beyond brief instructions, a man whose reputation in the city made most people lower their voices when they said his name. She dismissed the thought almost as quickly as it appeared. Damian Cole did not concern himself with the lives of his staff. She had worked in his house for 2 years, and he had never once asked about her family, never once shown interest in anything beyond whether his meals were on time and his house was clean. It seemed impossible that he would spend a fortune on a stranger's dying brother without a single word of explanation. And yet, she could think of no one else. The next morning, she stood beside her brother's hospital bed at Ashford Clinic, watching in disbelief as doctors in crisp white coats moved around him with a calm efficiency she had never witnessed in the overcrowded public ward. Caleb, pale and thin against the pillows, looked up at her with wide eyes. "Is this a dream?" he asked, his voice weak but curious. "No, sweetheart," she said, brushing his hair back from his forehead. "This is real." A doctor approached her, introducing himself as Dr. Whitmore, the physician overseeing Caleb's case. He explained the treatment plan in detail, a specialized therapy that targeted the rare blood condition directly, something the public hospital had been unable to offer due to cost and limited availability. He assured her that with consistent treatment over the coming weeks, Caleb's chances of a full recovery were higher than she had dared to hope. Elena listened, tears slipping silently down her cheeks, gripping her brother's small hand as if letting go might undo the miracle unfolding in front of her. She thanked the doctor over and over, but he simply smiled and told her that the arrangements had already been made, that her only job now was to be there for her brother. When she finally left the clinic that evening, her mind still spinning, she walked the long way back toward Damian Cole's mansion, turning the mystery over and over in her head. She had a shift to begin in an hour, and though her body ached with exhaustion after weeks of sleepless nights, her heart felt lighter than it had in months. She arrived at the mansion just as the sun began to set, slipping through the side entrance she always used, straightening her uniform before stepping into the kitchen to prepare dinner. She moved through her tasks in a daze, still trying to make sense of the sudden kindness that had entered her life from nowhere. Later that evening, she carried a tray to Damian's study, the same routine she performed every night. She knocked softly, waited for his voice to call her in, and stepped inside to find him standing by the window, his back to her, staring out at the darkened garden. She set the tray down on his desk, careful not to make a sound, and turned to leave. "Elena," he said, his voice cutting through the silence. She stopped, startled. He rarely spoke to her beyond simple instructions. "Yes, sir," she said, turning back to face him. He remained by the window for a long moment before finally turning to look at her. His expression was unreadable, the same cold composure he always wore, but something in his eyes seemed different tonight, softer somehow, though she could not explain why she noticed it. "How is your brother?" he asked. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She had never once mentioned Caleb to him. She had never mentioned her family at all. In 2 years of working in this house, she had kept every detail of her personal life carefully hidden, believing that a man like Damian Cole had no interest in the struggles of the people who served him. "I am sorry, sir," she said carefully, unsure how to answer without revealing too much. "I did not know you were aware of my family." Damian studied her for a long moment, his jaw tightening slightly, as if debating how much to reveal. Finally, he said only, "I make it my business to know what happens under my roof." It was not an answer, not really, but Elena felt a chill run through her, a mixture of fear and something else she could not name. Did he know about the nights she slipped away? Did he know about the private clinic, about the anonymous donor? Before she could ask, he waved a hand toward the door, signaling that their conversation was over. "You may go," he said, his voice returning to its usual cold formality. Elena left the study with her heart pounding, questions swirling through her mind as she made her way back to the kitchen. She could not shake the feeling that something significant had just happened, though she could not quite understand what it was. Over the following days, Caleb's condition began to improve. Color returned to his cheeks. His energy slowly came back. Elena visited him every night after her shifts ended, sitting beside his bed, reading to him, watching him grow stronger with each passing day. The doctors spoke with cautious optimism, telling her that if this progress continued, Caleb could be fully recovered within a matter of weeks. Elena wept with relief more than once, overwhelmed by a gratitude she had no way to express, directed at a donor whose identity remained a complete mystery. Meanwhile, inside the mansion, Damien found himself unable to focus on his usual work. Reports from his associates about rival territory disputes sat unread on his desk. Calls from his most trusted men went unanswered for hours at a time. His mind kept drifting back to the image of Elena sitting beside her brother's hospital bed, the quiet strength in her voice as she read aloud, the exhaustion she carried so gracefully that most people would never notice it at all. He told himself repeatedly that this was simply an act of charity, nothing more, a debt paid to his own painful memories of powerlessness. But late at night, when the house grew quiet, and he found himself standing by his window staring out at nothing, he knew the truth ran deeper than he was willing to admit. One evening, as Elena carried his dinner tray into the study, she noticed a folder sitting open on his desk, quickly closed the moment she entered. She caught only a glimpse of the papers inside, a hospital letterhead, a name that looked achingly familiar. Her heart skipped. "Sir," she began carefully, "is that from Ashford Clinic?" Damien's expression remained composed, but a flicker of something crossed his face before he masked it completely. "I have business interests in several medical facilities across the city," he said smoothly. "It is not uncommon for their paperwork to cross my desk." Elena studied him closely, searching for any sign of dishonesty, but his expression gave nothing away. Still, doubt lingered in her mind long after she left the room that night. The following week, while cleaning his study during his absence, she found herself standing near his desk, staring at the closed folder she had seen before. She knew it was wrong to look. She knew that whatever privacy Damien Cole guarded so fiercely was not hers to invade. But the pull of curiosity, combined with the desperate need to understand who had saved her brother's life, proved too strong to resist. She opened the folder. Inside were detailed records of Caleb's treatment, payment confirmations from an account she did not recognize, and a note scrawled in handwriting she had seen before on instructions left for the household staff. "Ensure the family never learns the source. No exceptions." Elena's hands began to shake as the truth settled over her like a wave. It had been him all along. She heard footsteps approaching the study door and quickly closed the folder, arranging it exactly as she had found it, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain it could be heard from across the room. She stepped back just as the door opened and Damien walked in, stopping short when he saw her standing near his desk. For a long, tense moment, neither of them spoke. "Elena," he said slowly, his eyes narrowing slightly as he took in her flushed cheeks and trembling hands. "I was just finishing the cleaning, sir," she said quickly, her voice unsteady. Damien's gaze moved to the folder on his desk, then back to her face, and in that instant, they both understood that whatever secret he had tried so carefully to protect had finally been discovered. The silence between them stretched on, heavy with everything neither of them had yet found the courage to say. Elena's mind raced back to the weeks before, trying to piece together every small detail she had overlooked. She remembered the strange car that had idled outside the clinic on her second visit, the driver never stepping out, never approaching, simply watching until she disappeared inside. She remembered a nurse mentioning that a well-dressed man had asked after Caleb's condition one afternoon while Elena was away buying coffee, though the nurse could not describe his face beyond saying he seemed important, the kind of man used to being obeyed without question. She had dismissed these moments at the time, too exhausted and too consumed with worry to give them proper attention. Now, standing in Damien's study, with the truth laid bare between them, every strange detail rearranged itself into a clear and undeniable pattern. "It was you outside the clinic that first week," she said slowly, watching his face for confirmation. Damien's expression remained guarded, but he did not deny it. "I needed to be certain the arrangements were being honored properly," he said. "I could not risk the clinic staff treating your brother with anything less than their full attention." "You were checking on us," Elena said, something in her voice softening despite the tension still coiled tightly in her chest. "I was ensuring my investment was protected," Damien replied, though even as the words left his mouth, they sounded hollow, unconvincing even to himself. Elena studied him carefully, noting the way his jaw tightened, the way his eyes refused to hold hers for more than a few seconds at a time. She had spent 2 years learning to read the subtle language of this man's silences, the small cues that revealed more than his carefully chosen words ever could. "You are not being entirely honest with me," she said gently. Damien exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair in a rare display of visible frustration. "Perhaps not entirely," he admitted. "But some truths are dangerous to speak aloud, Elena, especially in a house like this one, where walls have ears and loyalty can be bought by the highest bidder." Elena nodded, understanding the weight of caution that governed every aspect of his life, though something inside her ached at the thought of him carrying such generosity in complete secrecy, never allowing himself the simple comfort of being thanked properly. "I will keep your secret," she said finally, "but I will not pretend I do not know what you have done for us. You have given my brother a chance at life he never would have had otherwise. That is not something I can simply forget or set aside." Damien met her gaze then, and for the first time since she had known him, she saw something almost vulnerable flicker across his features, a crack in the armor he wore so carefully around everyone else in his life. "Then let it remain between us," he said quietly. "A secret shared only by the two of us." Elena agreed, and as she finally left the study that evening, her heart carried a strange mixture of gratitude, confusion, and something else she could not yet name, a warmth that had begun to grow in the space where fear and distance had once lived. Elena did not move. Damien did not move. The folder sat between them on the desk like a confession neither of them had spoken aloud. Finally, Damien closed the door behind him, the click of the latch loud in the silent room. "You read it," he said. It was not a question. Elena's throat felt tight, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "I did not mean to. I saw the letterhead and I could not stop myself. I am sorry, sir." Damien walked slowly toward his desk, picked up the folder, and set it down again with deliberate care, as if buying himself time to decide what to say next. For a man who commanded fear in every room he entered, who controlled entire networks of dangerous men without ever raising his voice, he seemed, for the first time Elena had ever witnessed, unsure of himself. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why would you do this for us? You barely know me." Damien's jaw tightened. "I know enough," he said. "I know you work harder than anyone else in this house. I know you never complain, even when you should. I know you carry burdens that would break most people, and you do it silently, without ever asking for help." Elena felt tears pressing at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back, unwilling to break down in front of him. "That still does not explain why," she said. Damien was quiet for a long moment, his eyes drifting toward the window, toward the darkness beyond the glass. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its usual hard edge. "When I was young," he said, "I watched someone I loved lie in a hospital bed exactly like your brother's. I had no money, no power, no way to help her. I watched her fade a little more every single day, and there was nothing I could do but sit beside her and pretend everything would be fine. She died before I turned 16. Elena's breath caught. She had never heard him speak about his past. In 2 years, she had gathered only fragments, whispered rumors among the household staff, stories of a boy who had clawed his way up from nothing to build the empire he now controlled. "I built everything I have so that I would never again feel that helpless," Damien continued, "so that I would never again stand by and watch someone suffer while I did nothing. When I saw you slipping out at night, when I followed you and saw your brother, I saw myself standing in that same hallway all those years ago. I could not walk away from that." Elena stared at him, seeing him differently now, the careful mask he wore every day cracking just enough to reveal the wounded boy still living somewhere beneath the surface of the powerful man he had become. "Thank you," she whispered. "I do not know how I will ever repay you." "You do not need to repay me," he said firmly. "I ask only one thing." "What is that?" she asked. "Do not tell anyone," he said. "If certain people learn that I have a weakness, that there is something in this world I care about beyond power and control, they will use it against me, against you, against your brother. My enemies would not hesitate to hurt the people close to me if they believed it would give them leverage over me." Elena nodded slowly, understanding the weight behind his words. "I will not tell anyone," she promised. For a moment, something passed between them. An understanding neither of them had expected to share. A fragile trust, built in the space of a single conversation. Over the following weeks, their relationship shifted in small, quiet ways. Damien began asking about Caleb's progress, his questions careful and measured at first, then gradually more genuine. Elena found herself speaking more freely with him, no longer hiding behind the careful distance she had maintained for 2 years. But outside the walls of the mansion, danger was gathering. Damien's rivals, a rising crime family known as the Hargrove Syndicate, had spent months probing for weaknesses in his organization, testing the loyalty of his men, searching for any opening they could exploit. Damien had kept them at bay through sheer force of reputation, but lately, whispers had begun circulating through the city's underworld. Rumors of a soft spot the great Damien Cole had developed. Rumors of a maid he seemed unusually protective of. One evening, as Damien met with his most trusted lieutenant, a sharp-eyed man named Gideon Marsh, the warning came directly. "They know about the girl," Gideon said, his voice low. "Someone saw you at Ashford Clinic. The Hargrove family has people watching your every move now. If they find out how much she means to you, they will not hesitate to use her." Damien's expression darkened. "Increase security around the house," he ordered. "No one comes near her without my knowledge." Gideon hesitated before speaking again. "With respect, sir, the safest thing you could do is distance yourself from her entirely. Send her and her brother somewhere far from the city. Cut all ties. It would protect them, and it would protect you." Damien said nothing for a long moment, staring out the window of his office. The city lights spread out below him like a map of everything he controlled and everything that could still be taken from him. "I will consider it," he said finally, though something in his voice suggested he already knew he could not follow through with such a plan. That night, as Elena carried his dinner tray into the study, she noticed the tension in his shoulders immediately, the way his eyes kept flicking toward the window, alert and watchful in a way she had not seen before. "Is something wrong, sir?" she asked, setting the tray down carefully. Damien hesitated before answering. "There are people in this city who wish to hurt me," he said. "And now that they know you matter to me, they may try to hurt you as well." Elena's stomach twisted with fear, not for herself, but for Caleb, still recovering in his hospital bed, vulnerable and unaware of the danger circling closer to their fragile new hope. "What do we do?" she asked. "We stay careful," Damien said. "I will increase security. You will not leave the house or the clinic without protection from now on. I will not let anything happen to you or your brother." Elena studied his face, searching for the cold, controlled man she had known for 2 years, but finding instead someone fiercely protective, someone willing to risk everything to keep his promise. "I trust you," she said quietly, and she meant it. Over the following days, life inside the mansion changed. Additional guards appeared at every entrance. Damien personally reviewed the security detail assigned to accompany Elena to the clinic each evening. He began joining her occasionally, standing quietly in the corner of Caleb's hospital room, watching the boy's condition improve with an expression that softened more each time he visited. Caleb, curious and unafraid despite his illness, began asking questions about the tall, serious man who sometimes accompanied his sister. "Who is that?" he asked Elena one evening after Damien had stepped out to take a call. "A friend," Elena said, smiling despite the uncertainty still swirling in her chest. "A very important friend." Caleb grinned weakly. "He looks scary, but his eyes are kind," he said, and Elena laughed for the first time in what felt like months. But even as warmth grew between them, the threat from the Hargrove syndicate continued to escalate. Reports reached Damien of increased surveillance around his territory, of quiet conversations among his rivals about striking directly at what they now understood to be his greatest vulnerability. Gideon Marsh delivered the news grimly one evening. "They are planning something, sir. I do not know exactly what, but my sources say it will happen soon. You need to decide how far you are willing to go to protect her." Damien stood at his window, staring out at the city he had spent his entire life conquering, and made a decision that would change everything. "I will not run from this," he said. "I will not hide her away like a secret to be ashamed of. If they want to test me, they will learn exactly what happens to those who threaten what belongs to me." Gideon nodded, though concern remained etched across his face. "Then we prepare for war," he said quietly. Outside the window, the city lights flickered like a warning, and somewhere across town, in a hospital room glowing with soft light, Elena sat beside her brother's bed, unaware that the fragile peace she had only just begun to trust was about to be tested in ways she could never have imagined. Later that week, Elena found herself sitting across from Damien at the long dining table, an arrangement that had become unexpectedly common in recent days. What had once been solitary meals eaten in silence had transformed into quiet conversations, small exchanges about Caleb's recovery, about the household, about nothing in particular, yet carrying a warmth neither of them had anticipated. "You do not have to keep me company at dinner, sir," she said one evening, though her tone lacked any real objection. "I am aware," Damien replied, a faint trace of something almost like humor touching his voice. "I choose to anyway." Elena smiled despite herself, unaccustomed to this softer version of the man she had served for 2 years. "Tell me about her," she said suddenly. "The person you lost, if you are willing to share." Damien was quiet for a long moment, turning his glass slowly on the table before answering. "Her name was Margaret," he said. "My mother. She worked 3 jobs to keep us fed after my father disappeared, and by the time the illness in her lungs was discovered, there was no money left to treat it properly. I was 14. I watched her grow weaker every single day, and every day I promised myself that if I ever gained the power to stop something like that from happening to someone else, I would use it without hesitation." Elena reached across the table, resting her hand gently over his. "I am sorry," she said softly. "That kind of loss never fully leaves a person." "No," Damien agreed. "It does not. But perhaps it can be turned into something worthwhile if given the chance." Their eyes met across the table, and neither pulled away for a long moment, something unspoken settling comfortably between them, a fragile understanding built from shared grief and quiet hope. The following days brought a rhythm neither of them had expected to find so easily. Mornings that began with brief, warm exchanges over coffee, evenings spent together at Caleb's bedside as his color returned and his laughter grew stronger. Damien found himself rearranging his schedule to accompany Elena to the clinic more often, his presence there becoming so familiar that even the nursing staff began greeting him by name, unaware of the fearsome reputation that followed him through the rest of the city. But beneath this fragile happiness, the danger from the Hargrove syndicate continued to grow, a storm gathering just beyond the walls of the peace they were only beginning to build. The warning came on a quiet Tuesday morning, delivered in the form of a single white envelope left on the front step of the mansion. No name, no return address, just a photograph inside. Damien stared at the image for a long moment before his hands tightened around the edges, crumpling the paper slightly. It was a photograph of Elena walking to the clinic, taken from a distance, her face clearly visible, a red mark drawn crudely over her image with a single word scrawled beneath it. Soon. Gideon Marsh arrived within minutes of being called, his face grim as he examined the photograph. "This is a message," he said. "They want you to know they can reach her whenever they choose. This is meant to frighten you into making a mistake." Damien's expression remained carefully controlled, but the fury simmering beneath the surface was unmistakable to anyone who knew him well. "Find out who delivered this," he ordered, "and triple the security around Elena and her brother immediately." Gideon nodded and left to carry out the instructions, leaving Damien alone with the photograph, his mind racing through every possible way the Hargrove syndicate might attempt to strike. When Elena arrived for her evening shift, she immediately noticed the increased tension throughout the house, guards stationed at every window, an unfamiliar heaviness in the air. She found Damien in his study, standing rigidly by his desk, the crumpled photograph still sitting where he had left it. "What happened?" she asked, fear creeping into her voice as she noticed his expression. Damien hesitated, weighing how much to tell her, before finally sliding the photograph across the desk toward her. Elena's breath caught as she saw her own face marked with red ink, the single threatening word beneath it. "They are watching me," she whispered. "They are trying to frighten me," Damien corrected firmly, "and it will not work. But I need you to trust me completely now. No more evening walks alone. No more slipping out unnoticed. From this point forward, you do not leave this house or the clinic without at least 2 guards accompanying you." Elena nodded, though her hands trembled as she set the photograph down. "What about Caleb?" she asked. "Is he safe at the clinic?" "I have already arranged additional security there as well," Damien said. "No one gets near him without my knowledge." Despite his reassurances, fear settled deep in Elena's chest, a fear that followed her through every hour of the following days. She moved through her duties in the house with careful vigilance, flinching at unfamiliar sounds, watching every shadow with suspicion. Caleb, still recovering steadily at the clinic, sensed his sister's tension immediately. "Are you scared of something?" he asked one evening, his small hand reaching for hers. Elena forced a smile, brushing his hair back gently. "Everything is fine, sweetheart," she said, though her voice wavered slightly. Caleb studied her with the perceptiveness only children seem to possess. "Is it because of the bad men?" he asked quietly. Elena's heart nearly stopped. "What do you know about that?" she asked carefully. "I heard the guards talking outside my room," Caleb admitted. "They said someone wants to hurt you because of the tall man who visits us." Elena pulled her brother into a careful embrace, mindful of the tubes still connected to his arm, holding him close as tears threatened to spill from her eyes. "No one is going to hurt either of us," she promised, though she was not entirely certain she believed it herself. Meanwhile, Damien spent every waking hour coordinating with Gideon and his most trusted men, tracing the source of the threatening photograph, tightening security around every point of vulnerability in his operation. The Hargrove syndicate had grown bolder in recent weeks, emboldened by rumors of Damien's distraction, convinced that his newfound attachment to Elena represented an opportunity to finally topple his control over the city's most valuable territories. A meeting was called between the two families, arranged through neutral intermediaries in an attempt to prevent open conflict. Damien arrived at the designated location, a private restaurant closed for the evening, flanked by Gideon and 2 additional guards, his expression carved from stone. Across the table sat Victor Hargrove, the head of the rival syndicate, a lean man with calculating eyes and a smile that never quite reached them. "Damien Cole," Victor said smoothly, gesturing toward the empty seat across from him. "I hear congratulations are in order. A new soft spot in that famously cold heart of yours." "Say what you came to say," Damien replied evenly, refusing to take the bait. Victor leaned back in his chair, studying Damien with amusement. "I simply want what is fair," he said. Your territory along the eastern docks has grown far too profitable for a man distracted by domestic concerns. Perhaps it is time you shared some of that burden with those better equipped to manage it. You are asking me to hand over my territory, Damien said flatly, because you believe I have grown weak. I am suggesting a mutually beneficial arrangement, Victor replied, his smile widening slightly. Though I confess, the alternative interests me far more. Your little maid and her sickly brother make for rather convenient leverage, should negotiations fail to reach a satisfactory conclusion. The threat, though delivered with practiced calm, sent a surge of controlled fury through Damien's chest. He kept his expression carefully neutral, refusing to give Victor the satisfaction of seeing him rattled. If a single hair on either of their heads is harmed, Damien said quietly, his voice carrying a deadly edge that made even Gideon shift uncomfortably beside him, I will burn your entire operation to the ground, and I will make certain you live long enough to watch it happen. Victor's smile faltered slightly, though he recovered quickly, waving a dismissive hand. Empty threats, he said. Consider my offer carefully, Damien. You have 1 week to decide whether you value your territory more than your new attachments. The meeting ended shortly after, with no resolution reached, only a deadline hanging heavy over everything Damien had built. On the drive back to the mansion, Gideon broke the tense silence. He means it, sir. Victor Hargrove does not make idle threats. We need a plan to protect Elena and Caleb that goes beyond simply adding more guards. Damien stared out the window, his mind working through every possible strategy, every contingency that might keep the people he had come to care for safe from the war closing in around them. I have an idea, he said finally, but it will require moving quickly, and it will require complete trust from Elena. That evening, Damien found Elena in the kitchen, finishing the last of her evening duties before her scheduled visit to the clinic. She looked up as he entered, immediately sensing the seriousness in his expression. We need to talk, he said. Elena set down the dish she had been drying, her heart pounding with anticipation of more bad news. What is it? She asked. Damien explained the meeting with Victor Hargrove carefully, watching Elena's face pale as she absorbed the severity of the threat now hanging over her and her brother. When he finished, she sank into a nearby chair, her hands trembling in her lap. They want to use us against you, she whispered. I will not let that happen, Damien said firmly, kneeling beside her chair so their eyes met directly. But I need your help. I have a plan to protect both of you, though it means trusting me completely, even when the path ahead seems uncertain. Elena studied his face, seeing the same fierce protectiveness she had witnessed in the hospital room. The same wounded boy who had once been powerless to save someone he loved, now standing before her, determined not to fail again. I trust you, she said, echoing the words she had spoken days before, though this time they carried even greater weight. Damien nodded, standing and extending his hand to help her rise from the chair. Then we move forward together, he said, starting tonight. Elena took his hand, and for a brief moment, their fingers intertwined, a silent promise passing between them that neither fully understood yet, but both recognized as something far deeper than employer and employee, something that had grown quietly in the space between fear and hope, and now stood ready to be tested against the full weight of the danger closing in around them. That night, Damien called an emergency meeting with his most trusted lieutenants, men who had served him faithfully for years, whose loyalty had been earned through fairness rather than fear alone. He laid out the situation plainly, the threat from Victor Hargrove, the danger now facing Elena and Caleb, the deadline hanging over all of them like a blade waiting to fall. We do not negotiate with threats against innocent people, Damien said, his voice carrying the same commanding authority that had built his empire from nothing. Effective immediately, security around this estate doubles. I want eyes on every access point, every possible route Hargrove's men might use to reach the clinic or this house. Gideon nodded firmly. It will be done, sir. One of the younger lieutenants, a sharp-eyed man named Oliver Finch, raised a cautious question. Sir, if I may ask, is this level of protection truly necessary for a member of the household staff? Forgive me, but resources are already stretched thin along the eastern docks. The room fell silent, tension crackling through the air as every man present waited to see how Damien would respond to the implied challenge. Damien's gaze settled on Oliver with an intensity that made the younger man visibly shrink back. Elena Whitfield and her brother are no longer simply members of this household, he said, his voice quiet but carrying absolute finality. They are under my personal protection, and any resource required to ensure their safety will be provided without question. Is that understood? Oliver nodded quickly, chastened. Understood, sir. My apologies. The meeting continued for another hour, contingency plans mapped out in careful detail, escape routes identified, safe houses prepared as backup options should the situation at the mansion become untenable. By the time the meeting concluded, every man in the room understood clearly that the woman who had once moved quietly through the background of Damien Cole's life now stood at its very center, protected with the same fierce dedication he had once reserved only for his own survival. As the lieutenants filed out, Gideon lingered behind, studying his employer with quiet curiosity. "You have changed, sir," he said carefully, "since that first night you followed her." Damien did not deny it. "Is that a problem?" he asked. Gideon considered the question seriously before answering. "No," he said finally. "I believe it might be the best thing that has happened to this organization in a very long time. Men do not follow power alone forever, sir. Eventually, they follow something worth believing in. Perhaps you have finally found something worth showing them." Damien said nothing, but the words settled deep within him, a quiet confirmation of everything he had begun to feel, but had not yet found the courage to name. The plan Damien devised was simple in structure, but demanding in execution. Caleb would be moved under heavy guard to a private recovery suite within Damien's own estate, where medical equipment and a dedicated nurse could replicate his clinic care under far tighter security. Elena would remain close at all times, her movements coordinated carefully with Gideon's men. Every route varied, every schedule kept unpredictable enough to prevent the Hargrove Syndicate from planning an ambush. The transfer happened quietly on a Thursday evening, an unmarked medical vehicle slipping through back streets toward the mansion, Caleb resting on a stretcher, still weak but stable, Elena riding beside him, gripping his hand the entire way. Damien met them at the estate's private entrance, personally overseeing the transfer of equipment into the newly prepared recovery room, a space that had once been a guest suite, now transformed with medical monitors and soft lighting designed to keep Caleb comfortable. "This is where you will stay until the treatment is complete," Damien told the boy gently, kneeling beside the bed as nurses arranged the final equipment. "You will be safe here." Caleb studied him with the same perceptive curiosity he always carried. "Are you protecting us because you like Elena?" he asked bluntly. Damien glanced toward Elena, who stood near the doorway, her cheeks flushing slightly at her brother's directness. He turned back to Caleb with the faintest hint of a smile touching his usually stern expression. "I am protecting you both because you matter," he said simply. And something in Caleb's expression suggested the answer satisfied him completely. For the following days, life within the mansion took on a strange new rhythm. Elena split her time between her usual household duties and sitting beside her brother's bed, while Damien coordinated increasingly tense negotiations with his network of allies, preparing for the possibility that Victor Hargrove would not honor the deadline peacefully. Gideon's intelligence network confirmed the worst fears on the sixth day. Hargrove was moving men toward the eastern edge of Damien's territory, positioning for what appeared to be a coordinated strike, not against the docks as expected, but against the mansion itself. "They know Caleb has been moved here," Gideon reported grimly during an emergency meeting in Damien's study. "Someone within our own ranks may have leaked the information." Damien's expression darkened. "Find the leak," he ordered, "and prepare every available man. If they intend to strike, we will be ready." That night, Damien personally checked every entrance to the estate, ensuring guards were positioned at each vulnerable point, reviewing security footage with an intensity that left no detail unchecked. Elena found him still awake near midnight, standing in the hallway outside Caleb's recovery room, his exhaustion evident despite his rigid posture. "You should rest," she said softly, approaching him carefully. "I cannot rest until I know you are both safe," he replied, his voice rough with fatigue. Elena studied him for a long moment before speaking again. "Why do you carry this burden so completely alone?" she asked. "You have people who would help you if you let them." Damien was quiet for a moment before answering. "Because every time I have allowed myself to depend on someone else," he said, "I have lost them. My mother, my closest friend, killed in a territory dispute years ago. I learned that the only way to protect what matters is to control everything myself, to never leave room for anyone else's failure to become my tragedy." Elena reached out, gently placing her hand against his arm, a small gesture that carried enormous weight given the careful distance they had maintained for so long. "You do not have to carry this alone anymore," she said quietly. "Not with me." Damien looked down at her hand resting against his arm, then up into her eyes, something raw and unguarded passing across his face for just a moment before his composure returned. "I cannot promise you safety," he said honestly, "not with certainty. But I promise you I will do everything within my power to protect you and Caleb, even if it costs me everything I have built." Elena held his gaze steadily. "Then we face it together," she said. In the 2 days before the attack, Damien and Elena found small pockets of calm amid the mounting tension. Moments that felt almost stolen given the danger pressing in around them. One afternoon, while Caleb napped under the nurse's watchful eye, Damien found Elena in the estate's small library, sorting through a stack of books she had brought from her old apartment above the bakery. "I did not know you read poetry," he said, noticing the worn volume in her hands. Elena smiled faintly. "My mother used to read to us before she passed. Caleb was too young to remember, but I kept her books. It is the only thing of hers I still have." Damien sat down across from her, his usual guarded posture softening in the quiet room. "Tell me about her," he said. "Your mother." Elena spoke for nearly an hour, recounting memories of a woman who had raised 2 children alone after their father left, who had worked tirelessly to give them a stable home despite having almost nothing, who had died of a sudden illness when Elena was only 17, leaving her to become both sister and guardian to a baby brother she loved fiercely. "That is why you never asked me for help," Damien said quietly, understanding settling over him. "You have spent your whole life believing you had to carry everything alone." Elena nodded, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. "I did not know how to ask," she admitted. "I did not think anyone would answer even if I did." Damien reached for her hand, holding it gently. "You do not have to carry it alone anymore," he said, echoing words she had once spoken to him. "Not with me." They sat together in comfortable silence after that, the weight of shared grief somehow lighter for having been spoken aloud, a fragile intimacy growing steadily between them even as danger gathered just beyond the estate's walls. The attack came 2 nights later, under cover of heavy rain that muffled the sound of approaching vehicles until they were already breaching the outer perimeter of the estate. Alarms sounded throughout the mansion as Damien's security team scrambled into position, gunfire erupting near the eastern gate as Hargrove's men attempted to force their way through. Damien moved immediately toward Caleb's recovery room, finding Elena already there, shielding her brother with her own body, her face pale but determined. "We need to move him," Damien said urgently, helping the nurse disconnect essential equipment while Gideon burst into the room, his expression tense. "They have breached the eastern gate," Gideon reported. "We are holding them back, but they have more men than we anticipated. We need to get Caleb to the safe room immediately." The safe room, hidden behind a false wall in the mansion's lower level, had been constructed years earlier during an earlier period of conflict, reinforced with steel and stocked with emergency supplies. Damien carried Caleb himself, moving swiftly through the chaotic hallways, while Elena followed close behind, flanked by two guards providing cover. Gunfire echoed through the mansion as they descended toward the safe room, the sounds of the ongoing battle growing more intense with each passing moment. Elena's heart pounded with terror, not for herself, but for Caleb, still weak from his treatment, trembling in Damien's arms as they moved. They reached the safe room just as a group of Hargrove's men broke through a side entrance, engaging Damien's remaining guards in a fierce exchange near the top of the stairs. Damien settled Caleb carefully onto a cot inside the reinforced room, turning to Elena with fierce urgency. "Stay here with him," he said. "Lock the door behind me. Do not open it for anyone except Gideon or myself." "Where are you going?" Elena asked, panic rising in her voice. "I need to end this," Damien said, his expression hardening into the ruthless determination that had built his empire in the first place. "Victor Hargrove came here believing he could threaten what belongs to me and walk away unpunished. I intend to prove him wrong." Before Elena could protest further, Damien turned and disappeared back into the chaos of the mansion, leaving her alone with Caleb behind the reinforced door, listening to the distant sounds of gunfire and shouting, praying desperately that the man who had transformed her entire world in the span of a few short weeks would survive the battle raging above them. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as Elena held Caleb close, whispering reassurances she was not entirely certain she believed herself. The boy, though frightened, remained remarkably calm, his small hand gripping hers tightly. "He will come back," Caleb whispered. "He promised to protect us." Elena pressed a kiss to her brother's forehead, tears slipping silently down her cheeks as the sounds of conflict continued to echo through the mansion above them, each gunshot sending a fresh wave of terror through her chest. "I hope you are right," she whispered back, holding him close as they waited together in the dark, uncertain silence of the safe room, praying that when the door finally opened again, it would reveal the face of the man who had somehow, against every instinct of caution she had built over years of careful survival, become the center of everything she now feared losing. The battle for the mansion raged for nearly 20 minutes, though to Elena, locked away in the safe room with Caleb trembling beside her, it felt like an eternity stretched beyond measure. Above them, Damien moved through his own home with lethal precision, coordinating his remaining guards through the chaos, pushing back against the wave of Hargrove's men who had breached the eastern perimeter. Years of careful planning, of building loyalty among his men through fairness rather than fear alone, proved decisive as his forces began to gain the upper hand, cutting off escape routes, cornering the intruders room by room. Gideon found Victor Hargrove himself near the mansion's grand staircase, having pushed deep into the estate, believing the chaos of the initial assault would provide enough cover to reach Caleb directly. Damien arrived moments later, his expression carved from cold fury as he faced the man who had threatened everything he had come to value. "This ends now," Damien said, his voice carrying a lethal calm that silenced the remaining sounds of struggle around them. Victor, cornered and outnumbered, attempted to bargain, offering territory concessions, promises of future peace, anything to escape the consequences of his failed assault. But Damien had heard enough empty promises to last a lifetime, and he was not interested in mercy for a man who had threatened a sick child and the woman who had somehow become the center of his world. The confrontation ended swiftly, Damien's forces securing Victor Hargrove and the remaining members of his crew, effectively dismantling the syndicate's capacity to threaten his territory ever again. Word of the failed attack spread quickly through the city's underworld, cementing Damien's reputation as a man whose protection could never be tested without severe consequence, while simultaneously revealing to his allies and enemies alike that beneath his legendary control lay a fierce, unwavering loyalty to those he considered his own. With the immediate danger neutralized, Damien moved quickly through the mansion, his heart pounding with an urgency that had nothing to do with the adrenaline of battle and everything to do with the fear that had gripped him the moment he left Elena and Caleb behind in the safe room. He reached the hidden door and knocked in the pattern he had established earlier. 3 quick raps followed by a pause and 2 more. The door opened cautiously, revealing Elena's tear-streaked face, relief flooding through her expression the moment she saw him standing there, alive and unharmed. "It is over," he said softly. "Victor Hargrove will never threaten you or Caleb again." Elena stepped forward without hesitation, wrapping her arms around him in an embrace that neither of them had planned but both desperately needed. Damien held her close, feeling the tremor of fear and relief moving through her body, understanding in that moment how completely his carefully guarded world had transformed since the night he first followed her into the darkness toward the hospital. Caleb, watching from his cot with wide eyes, offered a weak but genuine smile. "I told you he would come back," he said to his sister. In the days that followed, the mansion slowly returned to a sense of normalcy, though nothing about the household remained quite the same as before. Caleb's treatment continued successfully under the careful supervision of his medical team, his strength returning steadily with each passing week, color filling his cheeks in a way that brought tears of joy to Elena's eyes every time she witnessed it. Damien, meanwhile, found himself changed in ways he had never anticipated. The careful walls he had built around himself for years, the cold distance he maintained from everyone in his life, had cracked open completely during the crisis, revealing a capacity for warmth and devotion he had long believed himself incapable of feeling. In the aftermath of the confrontation, Gideon uncovered the identity of the household informant who had leaked Caleb's location to the Hargrove Syndicate, a junior guard who had been quietly bribed months earlier, long before Elena had ever entered Damien's life in any meaningful way. Damien dealt with the betrayal swiftly and decisively, ensuring that no further weaknesses remained within his organization that could be exploited by those who wished him harm. With Victor Hargrove's syndicate dismantled and the informant removed, a new sense of stability settled over the estate, one that allowed Damien and Elena the rare luxury of simply existing together without the constant shadow of danger hanging over every quiet moment they shared. Caleb's recovery continued steadily, each week bringing new milestones that filled the household with quiet joy. He began attending a small private tutoring program arranged within the estate, making friends among the children of Damien's most trusted associates, his laughter becoming a familiar and welcome sound throughout the mansion's once silent hallways. Elena, meanwhile, found herself navigating an entirely new relationship with the man she had once known only as a distant, intimidating employer. Their conversations grew longer, their shared silences more comfortable, until the careful distance that had once defined every interaction between them dissolved almost entirely, replaced by an easy familiarity neither of them had expected to find. One evening, several weeks after the attack, Damien found Elena in the garden, sitting quietly beside Caleb as the boy, now strong enough to walk short distances unassisted, examined the flowers blooming along the pathway with delighted curiosity. "May I join you?" Damien asked, approaching carefully. Elena smiled, gesturing to the empty space beside her on the garden bench. "Of course," she said. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, watching Caleb explore the garden with the boundless energy of a child finally free from the shadow of illness that had haunted him for so long. "I never properly thanked you," Elena said finally, breaking the silence. "Not just for saving Caleb's life, but for everything since, for protecting us, for trusting me with the truth about your past, for letting me see who you really are beneath everything the world believes about you." Damien turned to look at her, something soft and unguarded in his expression. "You do not need to thank me," he said. "I should be the one thanking you. Before I followed you that night, I believed I had built a life of complete control, of strength that needed nothing and no one. You showed me that strength without connection is simply another form of loneliness." Elena felt her heart swell with emotion. tears gathering in her eyes as she studied the man beside her, so different now from the cold, distant figure she had once served in careful silence. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Damien reached for her hand, holding it gently in his own. "Now," he said, "we build something neither of us expected to find. Together, if you are willing." Elena's answer came not in words, but in the way she leaned toward him, closing the distance between them until their lips met in a kiss that carried within it every unspoken fear, every quiet hope, every fragile moment of trust they had built together since the night everything began to change. Caleb, glancing back from his exploration of the garden, grinned widely at the sight, apparently unsurprised by the development unfolding before him. Nearby, Gideon Marsh watched from a discreet distance, a rare smile crossing his usually serious features as he witnessed the transformation of the man he had served loyally for years, a man who had finally allowed himself to be truly happy. The city outside the mansion's walls continued its restless rhythm, unaware of the quiet revolution that had taken place within one of its most feared households. A transformation born not from power or fear, but from the simple, unexpected act of a man following his maid into the night, and discovering in that hospital hallway a truth that would reshape the rest of his life. 6 months passed, and the mansion that had once felt cold and guarded now carried a warmth that surprised everyone who had known Damien Cole before that fateful night he followed his maid into the darkness. Caleb, fully recovered and thriving, had become a permanent fixture within the estate, his laughter echoing through hallways that had once known only silence and quiet efficiency. He attended a private school nearby, made friends easily, and spent his afternoons in the garden he had once explored with cautious wonder during his slow recovery. The doctors declared his condition fully resolved, the rare blood disorder that had once threatened his life, now nothing more than a distant memory, carefully monitored through routine checkups that grew less frequent with each passing month. Elena no longer wore the uniform of a maid. In the months following the confrontation with the Hargrove Syndicate, she had gradually taken on a new role within the household, one built not on servitude but on partnership. She oversaw the estate's operations with the same quiet competence she had always carried, but now she did so as Damien's equal, her opinions sought and valued in decisions that shaped the household and, increasingly, aspects of the legitimate businesses Damien had begun expanding into. Damien himself had changed in ways that surprised even those who had worked alongside him for years. His reputation in the city remained formidable, his control over his territory absolute, but those who dealt with him now noticed a difference, a willingness to extend fairness where once only calculation had existed, a loyalty to his people that inspired devotion rather than mere obedience. On a warm evening in early autumn, the garden that had witnessed so much during those turbulent weeks now hosted a different kind of gathering. String lights hung between the trees, soft music drifted from speakers hidden among the flower beds, and a small group of trusted friends and household staff gathered to witness a moment none of them had ever expected to see. Damien stood beneath an arch of white flowers, his usual composed expression softened by something that could only be described as pure happiness. As Elena walked toward him along a path lined with rose petals, Caleb proudly walking beside her, having insisted on the important task of escorting his sister. The ceremony was small, intimate, nothing like the elaborate displays of wealth and power that typically surrounded a man of Damien's standing in the city. He had insisted on simplicity, wanting nothing to distract from the genuine significance of the moment, from the promise he intended to make to the woman who had shown him that true strength included the courage to love without fear. As they exchanged their vows beneath the flowering arch, Gideon Marsh stood nearby, watching with quiet pride, having witnessed firsthand the transformation of the man he served, from a figure hardened by loss and fear into someone capable of building a life filled with genuine connection and joy. Caleb, seated in the front row with the excited energy of a child who had found not just a sister's happiness, but a new sense of family and belonging, watched the ceremony with a wide, delighted grin, occasionally glancing toward the small dog that had joined their household in recent months, a gift from Damien that Caleb had immediately claimed as his own. After the ceremony concluded, as the small gathering moved into a joyful celebration beneath the star-filled sky, Elena found a quiet moment alone with Damien near the edge of the garden, away from the warmth of the celebration, standing together in the cool evening air. "Do you ever think about that first night?" she asked softly, resting her head against his shoulder. "When you followed me to the hospital?" Damien wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "Every day," he admitted. "It was the night everything I believed about my life changed completely. I thought I understood strength, control, power. I had no idea what it truly meant to protect something precious until I saw you sitting beside your brother's bed, carrying a burden you never once complained about." Elena smiled, tilting her head up to look at him. "And now?" "Now," Damien said, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead, "I understand that the strongest thing I have ever done was allow myself to need someone else, to build a life around connection rather than isolation." Behind them, Caleb's laughter rang out as he chased the small dog across the lawn, the sound carrying through the garden like a promise of the bright future stretching out ahead of them all. The city beyond the mansion's walls continued its endless rhythm of ambition and danger. But within these walls, something rare and precious had taken root. A family built not from circumstance or convenience, but from courage, sacrifice, and the unexpected gift of love found in the most unlikely of places. Damien Cole, once known throughout the city only for his ruthless control and untouchable power, had found something far more valuable than territory or reputation. He had found a home, a family, and a woman whose quiet strength had taught him that the truest form of power lay not in isolation, but in the willingness to protect, to love, and to build a future together, no matter what dangers the world might still hold in store. And as the stars stretched endlessly above the garden that had once been the site of danger and fear, now transformed into a place of celebration and joy, Elena Whitfield rested peacefully in the arms of the man who had followed her into the darkness one desperate night, and found, against every expectation, the light that would guide the rest of both their lives. Later, as the celebration continued around them, Gideon approached the couple with a small wrapped box, presenting it to Damien with an unusually warm smile. "A gift," he explained, "from the men. They wanted you to know how much your example has meant to them these past months." Damien opened the box to find a simple silver frame, and inside it, a photograph taken quietly by one of the household staff months earlier, capturing Elena reading to Caleb in his hospital bed, a moment neither of them had known was being recorded. Beneath the photograph, a small engraved plate read, "The night everything changed." Damien stared at the image for a long moment, overwhelmed by the memory of how far they had all come since that first desperate night. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice thick with an emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. As the evening wore on, Caleb eventually grew tired, and Elena carried him gently toward the house, tucking him into bed while Damien lingered outside a moment longer, watching the stars above the garden that had become the heart of their new life together. When Elena returned, she found him standing exactly where she had left him, and she slipped her hand into his without a word. "Whatever comes next," she said softly, "we face it together." "Always," Damien replied, and together they walked back toward the home they had built from the ashes of fear, ready to face whatever the future held, no longer as a powerful boss and his quiet maid, but as partners bound by love, loyalty, and the unbreakable strength they had discovered in each other.